talk about contacts and the choice that we have for our dogs on their contacts. There are lots of reasons that dogs don't actually hit the yellow. Lots of different reasons. And when you have a dog that is not hitting the yellow, either actively jumping from high up or just naturally striding over it, you want to know that. You want to be a detective and figure out why your dog's not hitting the contact if you haven't actively trained for a hitting running contact. So my opinion is that I either teach a stop contact, especially to all my new handlers. I love my new handlers to have a stop contact, or I teach, I've taught my own dog a running contact. But what I encounter is a lot of people who start out with kind of a modified stop, or they just wait for their dogs to get in here and then they go on. And what happens over time for all contacts, regardless if you've trained a running or a stop contact, is that contacts in general start to deteriorate over time. So they start to lose their ability because the dog starts to anticipate. So very similar to the 10th pole pop out, that if you haven't taught exit training for a 10th pole pop out problem on weed pulls, and you haven't taught your dog to run into the contact and either run through it or stop, what happens is it starts to deteriorate. And so you have to go back in there and either actively train for hitting the contact, just like you have to go in and actively train for exit training on weed pulls. If you don't, and you just start moving through them, the dog starts to anticipate the next obstacle, or they just start to watch for the handler motion and move forward with more handler motion. As the handler passes by the dog's eyes or ear set, the dog wants to go forward. And so even though I've trained a stop on my teeter, which is essentially what he's doing right now, is that when I bypass, they want to go. So watch, if I pick up the speed, he may stay because he's got a pretty good stay. Can you see him drop his ear set back as he starts to see me pick up the motion? And so that as we pass them, they want to go with us. Okay, yeah, good boy, good boy. So unless you train them for an active stop or and then wait for a release word, or if you don't actively train them for hitting the contact, and when I say hitting the contact, I use a mat, so I like to have an external mat that I train off the contact and then move it onto the contact. If you don't train for that, what happens is as the dog's speed increases or their adrenaline increases, usually most dogs start to stride over the contact. So that's one thing that happens. And so if you have a dog that is naturally striding over the contact with adrenaline from a trial, or just picking up speed because they're building confidence builds speed. If you have a dog that is not naturally hitting your contacts, your yellow zone contacts, then you need to actively train for smacking it, for smacking the yellow either with their front feet or their back feet. Some people go for all four, some people go just for the front, some people go just for the back. And so it really depends on what you want and what your dog actually starts to naturally gravitate towards as well. So the other thing that happens is that with stop contacts, we get excited about going on. And so we start to quick release our dogs off the end. So if the dog gets into this zone here, we're okay with it when we trained somewhere down here. So either four on, all 4 feet on the board, or 2 feet off, 2 feet on. So he was in a 2 feet on, 2 feet off earlier. So as they get more and more into it, and as you start to do more and more quick releases, if you start quick releasing from up here, then the dog will start to drive into here and jump. right? Drive into here, or some run through, right? I'm talking about dogs that have problems, not dogs that are just naturally running in, or, right, if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? So, but if you've got an active, if you're getting a lot of NQs because of your contacts, then I would actively train for it as opposed to just hope for it, right? And a lot of people blame the energy of a trial. And while yes, that is true, the energy of the trial definitely brings the dog's speed up, brings their adrenaline up, brings their anticipation up. It doesn't mean that you can't train for that and keep working towards your original criteria of either coming in low or stopping altogether. So if you've got a problem with jumping the contact, let me just show you just a couple of other things that have a tendency to cause problems. So sometimes we manage our contacts. And when I say that we manage them, what it means is that the dog's taking cues off of either our location or our location coming up on them, or our distance away from them, and they will drive either forward with us or in front of us. And sometimes behind us, right? So it kind of depends on the dog. So I have one student who she has running contacts that she trained just naturally, right? The dog just naturally strided in for a very, very long time, but the dog has slowly started to speed up. And she doesn't want to go back and train running contacts with the mat, which is fine, but then she's left with management. She's left with, well, this does help your dog, so go ahead and do that. And for her, it's having to be just one stride in front of her. And so when she's doing the contact, the management position is here to start helping the dog stay forward driven and not start looking back at the handler. So the contact zone itself is not totally independent, which is totally fine, right? It's totally fine if that's where you want to go. So I tell my students, I'm like, you have a few choices. One, you can continue to manage, right, and be in the location that helps your dog the most with their contact criteria, or you can train stopped, or you can train running, right? One of those options. A couple of other things that cause our dogs to jump contacts, and this is they're not trained, they're just working. They've been working for the handler for a long time, on and off success, but some things that actually actively make our dogs jump off of contacts, one of them is encroaching on their space, so crowding them. And I see a lot of handlers like touch, 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 and that encroachment on them is difficult for a lot of dogs. They don't like to be pushed on, and so any sort of convergence on them, the dog starts to question what they're supposed to do, and they just launch off either early or off to the side. So encroaching on our dogs can definitely be an issue for dogs that have just I don't know what the right word is, a quasi-trained contact. Started out as natural contact, running contact, but then it started to deteriorate, and they want to keep the running contact but not actively train for a smack. So the other thing that some dogs, you have to know your dog, so you have to videotape and do a whole bunch of experimenting to see what is causing your dog to jump, potentially, right? The other one is distance away from your dog. So if you're too far laterally away from the dog, sometimes that pulls them off early, and they'll come off this zone here as opposed to running straight. And that's true with running contacts well. People who train for smacking, they have to train for that lateral distance, so the dog's not coming off sideways. They're running straight, then turning. So dogs always want to pull on the parallel line that we pull on. And so if we pull off this dog walk on this parallel line, the dog's going to want to parallel line that with us. Another thing that I have experienced with small dogs is that I think, in my opinion, I think that some small dogs in their early training of the dog walk, I think they actually may have hit their pasterns on the edge of the dog walk. And so for some of our smaller dogs or just our sensitive dogs, I think that there was actually a pain threshold that caused them to start to leap more forward and forward. And one of the ways that you can tell if you've got a dog that potentially has some issues with the end of the board or how it feels, maybe they hit their feet as they were running through or their pasterns as they were running through. One of the telltale signs of dogs who are trying to actively avoid the very end piece is they leap up, right? So they're actively trying to get out of the way, as opposed to dogs that naturally stride from here and go, right? So a small dog that's leaping from here is avoidance jumping, right? They're trying to avoid hitting the bottom, and so they overcompensate with that jump. The other thing that I see those same dogs do from time to time, if they don't stride themselves correctly to jump correctly, they'll actually jump off here. So they'll jump off the side and run forward. And so that is avoiding the end. And you'll see that a lot on teeters. So teeters definitely, for small dogs especially, especially if they've jumped when it's moving back up on them, they'll actively avoid it. I've seen my own border collie started to have a reverb on a teeter and started to release on the side of the teeter. I was working on quick releases on the teeter, and he started to come off on the side because when I slowed the video down, as the teeter board was raising back up, it whacked him right in the pastern. So definitely something to video and try and detect if it's actively avoiding. And one of the ways that you can help with dogs like that, and again, this is managed because we haven't taught them to actively hit somewhere in here, but we're managing it. So doing a modified running where we're not actively teaching the running contact. One thing that I think works is to allow the dog to beat you, right? So to allow the dog to be in front of you usually can have an effect of slowing them down just enough to bring them into the yellow contact, and then they can go off. My personal opinion though is I love training, and so I would love to see anybody that's got jumping the yellow in their contact issues, I would love to see them actively train for either a stop contact or an active running contact, like looking for something and smacking it. So a yoga mat or something, some sort of active target zone that the dog has learned how to smack on the ground, back and forth, time and time again, all different angles, all different speeds, and then move it to the dog walk. And same thing holds true with the A-frame. So the A-frame, teaching them how to either actively smack into it or have a stop contact, because jumping high on an A-frame I think has the same adverse effects as a stop contact. And so teaching them to come down and run into a lower area to allow for a healthier shoulder hit when they do finally hit the ground. All right, so how do we train for adrenaline? How do we train for the trial environment? One of the things that I think that we need to do is to overcompensate on our own home turf, wherever we practice our dog walks or our A-frames, is to overdo the distraction. I think if you overdo your distraction, your side changes in practice, then you're more likely to help them understand that they can concentrate on this area while you're doing goofy stuff. Because if you're not working on active distractions and bugging your dog in this area, then they don't know what to focus on or haven't practiced focusing on something within the environment of distractions, which is a trial environment, right? And so as a handler, I want to over distract my dog on their contacts, bring in different wacky things. If you look back on some of my videos, you'll see me jumping over a running board, a dog walk running board, while it's on the ground, and teaching him how to just pay attention to your job. I'm doing something goofy over here. I've knelt on the ground with him. Any distraction training that I do in weed pulls, put it back onto your dog walk as well. And the A-frame. The A-frame's a little harder to jump over, but definitely, you know, get in there with just mild hand waves. So doing something like this, right? Just, hey, I'm moving. I do avoid going over my head. At least for now, I haven't gone over my head, but definitely all of this is game, just kind of randomly moving my hands around. But my dog's grown up with that. He has grown up with this here, means there's nothing in it. I'm not throwing an active cookie. My active cookie throw is directed at him. Do you see how his ears kind of perked up when I'm like here and I throw? And I give him a get it cue that means go search for, yet am I saying all your words? You're so cute. So I give him an understanding that we are working on the throw out, but until then, I'm gonna actually just bug you and ask you potentially to do something in agility. Super, excellent. Oh, one last thing. If you're struggling with stop contacts, I highly recommend, if you're struggling with stop contacts, I highly recommend you invest in some sort of Kato board or travel plank, because this is where you're going to teach all of your stop contact stuff for this. I mean, I taught my running contact on this. I have taught him verbally that he can go through it on a hit it, and he has to stop when I say teeter. So he has learned both of his contact words on this Kato board. You go over there. You go over there. Hit it, hit it, hit it. Yeah! Hit it, hit it, hit it. Yeah! Teeter, teeter, teeter. Yes! Good boy. Good job. Good. Good job. Super. Yeah. Teeter, teeter, teeter. Yes, beautiful. Good boy. Super, super. That's good boy. Oh, super. Hit it, hit it, hit it, hit it. Yeah. And so investing in this any sort of travel plank or building your own, putting some sand on it, or even I have an old one that I used, an old 1980s step. This is for all of my older viewers. You guys remember this, right? Jane Fonda and Richard Simmons doing the step. Go to any Value Village and you're almost guaranteed to find one there. Put a yoga mat on top of it for a little bit of grip, and it works as a great travel plank, especially the lower one. So it came in 3 sizes. Use the smaller one and teach your dog how to run over it, either stop on it or smack it. This one doesn't transition over to here. This one doesn't transition over to here. So the travel plank doesn't work. Once you teach them how to run over it on the ground, it doesn't easily transition over to the dog walk, but a yoga mat does. And so you can put a yoga mat on top of this and then bring the yoga mat over here. And that works really nicely. That's his favorite trick when I'm talking, is to throw it, right? Flip it, flip it. Can you flip? Flip. Yeah, very good. All right. Let me know if you have any questions. Take care. Good luck. Have fun training.